Welcome back, everyone. We are up to reading chapter 8. So as I say at the beginning of every chapter, think back to what specifically happened in chapter 7. Remember, they have just met the Sorting Hat. They've just had their first evening at Hogwarts. So think about the important details that came up through that. And then think back from chapter 1 to 7 of the 3 most important details you have stumbled across so far. Is there anything you're picking up on when you look at characters, relationships, settings, plots, any events that have happened, so any conflict and resolution? You might want to take down some notes. As I always say, feel free to pause me and take down some notes as I am reading. And with that, we shall begin chapter 8. The Potions Master. There, look! Where? Next to the tall kid with the red hair. Wearing the glasses. Did you see his face? Did you see his scar? Whispers followed Harry from the moment he left his dormitory the next day. People queuing outside classrooms stood on tiptoe to get a look at him, or doubled back to pass him in the corridors again, staring. Harry wished they wouldn't, because he was trying to concentrate on finding his way to classes. So once again, put yourself back in Harry's place, into his shoes. Think about how he's feeling when everyone knows more about him than he does. So think about the emotions he's feeling, and he's trying to get his head around the fact he's just found out he's starting wizard school, let alone everyone always trying to have a look at where he is and talking about him, which he can very obviously hear. There were 142 staircases at Hogwarts, wide sweeping ones, narrow rickety ones, some that led somewhere different on a Friday, some with a vanishing step halfway up that you had to remember to jump. Then there were doors that wouldn't open unless you asked politely, which isn't a bad thing. I think manners goes a long way. Or tickled them in exactly the right place, and doors that weren't really doors at all, but solid walls just pretending. It was also very hard to remember where anything was, because it all seemed to move around a lot. The people in the portraits kept going to visit each other, and Harry was sure the coats of armour could walk. The ghosts didn't help either. It was always a nasty shock when one of them glided suddenly through a door you were trying to open. Nearly Headless Nick was always happy to point you Gryffindors in the right direction, but Peeves, the poltergeist, was worth two locked doors and a trick staircase if you met him when you were late for class. He would drop waste paper baskets on your head, pull rugs from under your feet, pelt you with bits of chalk, or sneak up behind you. Invisible, grab your nose and screech, "Got your conch!" Even worse than Peeves, if that was possible, was the caretaker, Argus Filch. Harry and Ron managed to get on the wrong side of him their very first morning. Filch found them trying to force their way through a door, which unluckily turned out to be the entrance to the out-of-bounds corridor on the 3rd floor. So think back, make a text-to-self connection if there's ever been someone you have encountered that you feel like you've got on the wrong side of them in the first moment you've met them, and you've struggled to get back on their good side, so to speak, or you've struggled to build that relationship with them to show them that you were someone very different to what they may have first believed. But you may also be in a situation where you have very quickly made judgments on someone in the first meeting and watch them try and explain and to show you they are a good person. He wouldn't believe they were lost, was sure they were trying to break into it on purpose, and was threatening to lock them in the dungeons when they were rescued by Professor Quirrell, who was passing. Filch owned a cat called Mrs. Norris, a scrawny, dust-coloured creature with bulging lamp-like eyes, just like Filch's. She patrolled the corridors alone. Break a rule in front of her, put just one toe out of line, and she'd whisk off for Filch, who'd appear, wheezing 2 seconds later. Filch knew the secret passageways of the school better than anyone, except perhaps the Weasley twins, because as we recall, the Weasley twins are the ones that have been into the forest when they know that is out of bounds. They're the ones that get up to mischief the most so far that we have met. And they could pop up as suddenly as any of the ghosts. The students all hated him, and it was the dearest ambition of many to give Mrs. Norris a good kick. And then, once you had managed to find them, there were the lessons themselves. There was a lot more to magic, as Harry quickly found out, than just waving your wand and saying a few funny words. They had to study the night skies through their telescopes every Wednesday at midnight and learn the names of different stars and the movements of the planets. 3 times a week, they went out to the greenhouses behind the castle to study herbology with a dumpy little witch called Professor Sprout, where they learnt how to take care of all the strange plants and fungi and found out what they were used for. Easily the most boring lesson was History of Magic, which was the only class taught by a ghost. Professor Binns had been very old indeed when he had fallen asleep in front of the staff room fire and got up the next morning to teach, leaving his body behind him. Binns droned on and on while they scribbled down names and dates and got Emeric the Evil and Ulrich the Oddball mixed up. Professor Flitwick, the charms teacher, was a tiny little wizard who had to stand on a pile of books to see over his desk. At the start of their first lesson, he took the register, which is what we call the roll. He took the register and then when he reached Harry's name, he gave an excited squeak and toppled out of sight. Professor McGonagall was, again, different. As I'm sure you're aware, all your teachers are very different. We are all different people. So we act differently and we behave differently, and I know many of us have different expectations. That's how it is in the wide world of meeting different people. Harry had been quite right to think she wasn't a teacher to cross. Strict and clever, she gave them a talking to the moment they had sat down in her first class. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she said. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. Then she changed her desk into a pig and back again. They were all very impressed and couldn't wait to get started, but soon realised they weren't going to be changing the furniture into animals for a long time. After making a lot of complicated notes, they were each given a match and started trying to turn it into a needle. By the end of the lesson, only Hermione Granger had made any difference to her match. Professor McGonagall showed the class how it had all gone silver and pointy and gave Hermione a rare smile. The class everyone had really been looking forward to was Defence Against the Dark Arts. But Quirrell's lessons turned out to be a bit of a joke. His classroom smelled strongly of garlic, which everyone said was to ward off a vampire he'd met in Romania and was afraid would be coming back to get him one of these days. His turban, he told them, had been given to him by an African prince as a thank you for getting rid of a troublesome zombie. But they weren't sure they believed this story. For one thing, when Seamus Finnegan asked eagerly to hear how Quirrell had fought off the zombie, Quirrell went pink and started talking about the weather. For another, they had noticed that a funny smell hung around the turban, and the Weasley twins insisted that it was stuffed full of garlic as well, so that Quirrell was protected wherever he went. Harry was very relieved to find out he wasn't miles behind everyone else. Lots of people had come from Muggle families and, like him, hadn't any idea that they were witches and wizards. There was so much to learn that even people like Ron didn't have much of a head start. So once again, think back to your day one of secondary college this year and how you felt. What fears and apprehensions did you have about walking into your first class? And because it's not like primary school, you had your first English class, your first maths class, first food tech, first humanities, so you were meeting a new teacher every single time you walked into a classroom. So think about all those feelings, and I'm sure you can very easily put yourself into Harry's shoes. Friday was an important day for Harry and Ron. They finally managed to find their way down the Great Hall for breakfast without getting lost once. "What have we got today?" Harry asked Ron as he poured sugar on his porridge. "Double potions with the Slytherins," said Ron. "Snape's head of Slytherin House. They say he always favours them. We'll be able to see if it's true." "Wish McGonagall favoured us," said Harry. Professor McGonagall was head of Gryffindor House, but it hadn't stopped her giving them a huge pile of homework the day before. Just then, the post arrived. Harry had got used to this by now, but it had given him a bit of a shock on the first morning when about 100 owls had suddenly streamed into the great hall during breakfast, circling the tables until they saw their owners and dropping letters and packages onto their laps. Hedwig hadn't brought Harry anything so far. She sometimes flew in to nibble his ear and have a bit of toast before going off to sleep in the owlery with the other owls. This morning, however, she fluttered down between the marmalade and the sugar bowl and dropped a note onto Harry's plate. Harry tore it open at once. "Dear Harry," it said in a very untidy scrawl, "I know you get Friday afternoons off, so I would like you to come and have a cup of tea with me around 3. I want to hear all about your first week. Send us an answer back with Hedwig. Hagrid." Harry borrowed Ron's quill, scribbled, "Yes, please, see you later," on the back of the note and sent Hedwig off again. It was lucky that Harry had tea with Hagrid to look forward to, because the potions lesson turned out to be the worst thing that had happened to him so far. At the start of term banquet, Harry had got the idea that Professor Snape disliked him. So if I think back to what happened in the last chapter, he felt Snape was staring at him and he felt that burning sensation on his scar, even for just a moment. So he's already got his first impression of what he thinks of Snape. By the end of the lesson, that's good news, he knew he'd been wrong. Snape didn't dislike Harry, he hated him. The potions lesson took place down in one of the dungeons. It was colder here than up in the main castle and would have been quite creepy enough without the pickled animals floating in glass jars all around the walls. Snape, like Flitwick, started the class by taking the register, once again the roll, and like Flitwick, he had paused at Harry's name. "Ah, yes," he said softly. "Harry Potter, our new celebrity." Draco Malfoy and his friends Crabbe and Goyle sniggered behind their hands. Snape finished calling the names and looked up at the class. His eyes were black like Hagrid's, but they had none of Hagrid's warmth. They were cold and empty and made you think of dark tunnels. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making," he began. He spoke in barely more than a whisper, but they caught every word. Like Professor McGonagall, Snape had the gift of keeping a class silent without effort. As there is a little foolish wand-waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you will really understand the beauty of the softly simmering cauldron with its shimmering fumes, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind, ensnaring the senses. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stop a death. If you aren't as big a bunch of dunderheads as I usually have to teach. More silence followed this little speech. Harry and Ron exchanged looks with raised eyebrows. Hermione Granger was on the edge of her seat and looked desperate to start proving that she wasn't a dunderhead. "Potter!" said Snape suddenly. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "Powdered root of what to an infusion of what?" Harry glanced at Ron, who looked as stumped as he was. Hermione's hand had shot into the air. "I don't know, sir," said Harry. Snape's lips curled into a sneer. "Tut, tut. Clearly, fame isn't everything." He ignored Hermione's hand. "Let's try again, Potter. Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" Hermione stretched her hand as high into the air as it would go without her leaving her seat, but Harry didn't have the faintest idea what a bezoar was. And my recollections, I'm accessing my schema, all of my knowledge, I have no idea either. He tried not to look at Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle, who were shaking with laughter. "I don't know, sir." "Thought you would open a book before coming, eh?" Oh, sorry, I'll reread that, guys. "Thought you wouldn't open a book before coming, eh, Potter?" Harry forced himself to keep looking straight into those cold eyes. He had looked through his books at the Dursleys, but did Snape expect him to remember everything in 1,000 magical herbs and fungi? Snape was still ignoring Hermione's quivering hand. and I'm going to pause there and restart the second half of this chapter.